My daughter said I was a manufacturing error in our family, that it was better to let me rot in an asylum than to continue pretending that we had some kind of bond. Those words lingered in the kitchen like a burning smell that no one could pinpoint. But it was when her backpack fell to the ground, open, that my breath stopped for good. What I saw there swallowed me alive. I thought I had buried my past, but what was inside that backpack proved that perhaps he had just changed his body. My name is Carmen Velasquez, 62 years, former caregiver, now retired, living on the bare minimum in a borrowed house. I'm the kind of woman who learned to survive without being noticed. When you go through certain things in life, you understand that being invisible can be a blessing. People look at me and see an ordinary elderly woman, perhaps a little too tired for her age. But no one imagines the sleepless nights, the names I can't say, the places I can't visit. Nobody knows about the 20 years I spent laundering money on behalf of men who never looked me in the eye. Today I live with my youngest daughter, Mariana, 27 years, cold as ice, too smart for his own safety, distant as if every inch between us was a punishment imposed by her. When she was born, I was already trying to get out of the wrong life. It was the first child I held in my arms after so many losses. I promised I would do everything differently with her, but promises sometimes are just nice words that we use to sleep peacefully. In the last few months, Mariana had been acting strange. She arrived late, irritated, locked doors, whispered on the phone. I tried not to get involved. It was no longer my job. But last night, after yet another argument, she threw my plate on the floor and screamed that I had destroyed everything. He said our family was rotten since I was there, that I was the mistake, the poison, and that she just wanted distance. When she went to her room and the door slammed, her backpack slipped off her shoulder and split open on impact. A gun fell, the old, rusty ones with the cracked wooden handle. A folded photo came with it. I recognized that face. The man in the photo was dead, and the name scrawled on the back was one I hadn't heard in nearly 30 years. The ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet. My past was there, in flesh and metal, and in my daughter's hands. It was as if a mirror had broken into 1,000 pieces, and each shard reflected something I had tried to forget. The smell of the gun was the same as what I smelled when I fled with my young children for the first time. The ink in the notebook in the backpack was still fresh. There were names, dates, routes. Everything pointed to something organized, something that required precision, and I knew this type of organization well. I spent the whole night sitting on the living room floor, the gun next to it, covered by a tablecloth. Mariana slept as if the world hadn't changed, and maybe, for her, nothing had changed. Maybe she would never have walked away from the kind of life I tried to protect her from. Or maybe she had been pulled into it because of me. The weight of silence was greater than that of guilt. I knew I needed to act, but the question was how. And how much could I bear to face all of this again? The first rays of sunlight brought more questions than answers. I took the old phone hidden at the bottom of the closet. One contact still worked, a name, someone who owed me a favor a long time ago. And that's when I understood. It wasn't just about saving my daughter. It was about saving myself from repetition. It was about breaking a cycle before it swallowed another generation. I had no more time to waste. If you believe that it is never too late to face the truth, that no matter how dark the past is, there is always a chance to start over, then stay with me in this story. Like this video, turn on notifications and subscribe to the Emotion of Age channel. Here, we show that dignity has no expiration date, and that courage, sometimes, lives right where shame tried to hide for years. Get ready, because this story is just beginning. My mother left me in an orphanage when I was 7. I still remember the color of her blouse, a burnt yellow, and the smell of the cheap cigarette stuck to her collar. She didn't say goodbye. He just pushed me in the back and walked away as if he was going to return a wrong purchase. I stood there, watching the closed door, waiting for him to come back and say it was all a mistake. But she didn't come back, not even that day, not ever again. I grew up among iron beds, muffled screams and forced prayers. The orphanage was cold, with gray walls and long hallways that smelled of expired disinfectant. Nobody called anyone by name. We were numbers. Voices faded. Children hungry for everything. For food, for touch, for truth. At 10 years old, I already knew how to hide food in the mattress pad and how to escape through windows. From the bathroom without being seen. I learned early that no one would come to save me. At 15, I ran away with a boy who said he knew a quick way to make money. His name was Tomas. He spoke about life on the streets with a twinkle in his eye, as if freedom was something that was stolen, not earned. Before long, we were sleeping in abandoned houses and doing odd jobs for men with expensive watches and looks that never looked at our faces. First, it was delivering envelopes. Then, driving cars with covered windows. One day, they put a gun in my hand and said, "You just need to scare me, nothing more." But it wasn't just scary, it never is. The first man I pointed that gun at was crying so much he could barely speak. I was shaking all over, but the money they promised seemed like enough to rent a room for a week and buy hot food. I fulfilled the order. I then ran away. But that night, when I laid my head on the stolen pillow, I dreamed of the sound of his breathing with wide eyes, and that sound would accompany me for decades. At 18, I became pregnant for the first time. The father disappeared the same day he saw the positive test. Alone, without documents, without family, I did what many others did before me. I knelt down in front of a loan shark with tattoos on his face and asked for help. In return, I began laundering money for a small local faction that would grow in the following years. I received payments in cash, which I hid. Inside rice pots, inside the washing tub, even in the upholstery of the sofa. Every time a note came in, a part of my soul came out. I had 3 children in 5 years, all with different fathers. None of them stayed. I balanced between the mother who carried bread in her school bag and the woman who delivered fat envelopes to armed men. She told the children that she worked as a maid. He wore a fake uniform to keep the story going. But lies get old, and children grow up with questions. When my eldest son, Diego, turned 13, he began to follow in my footsteps without me noticing. He would disappear at night and return with money. One day, he didn't come back. 3 weeks later, I found a backpack thrown in the bushes of a vacant lot. It was his. It was empty. There was no burial, no body, just emptiness. After that, I tried to stop. I moved away from contacts. I changed cities. I burned papers. I deleted names from my cell phone. But easy money is addictive, and the memory hurts when we stop. So I came back, only this time, quieter. I became more invisible until the youngest was born, Mariana. My last attempt to do something right. Her father was a police officer who said he loved me, but disappeared when he found out who I was. I was a mother and a father. I was tired, but determined. I worked as a caregiver for the elderly. I hid my past under layers of routine and silence. I never spoke about Diego. I never talked about the things I did. I wanted to protect Mariana from my story. But I didn't realize that I was just pushing everything under a rug that she would one day step on. Our moments of affection were few. I was afraid of getting attached, afraid that she would find out, or worse, to judge me. So we were like strangers sharing the same roof. She with her books and headphones, me with my old TV and my medicine. A relationship that was limited to short questions and dry answers. And yet, when she screamed, I heard more than words. I heard the echo of everything I stopped being as a mother. The most painful thing is knowing that everything I did to protect them, so that they wouldn't go hungry, so they would have better shoes than mine. But sacrifices made in the dark create shadows, and these shadows grow. They grow until they swallow what's left of us. I remember paying $20,000 to keep Mariana in a private school when she was 10 years old. It was money from the sale of a batch of weapons hidden in rice boxes. In the same week, I buried a woman who was killed because of my debt. I sacrificed love, friendship, honor, all for a future that may never have existed. Today, looking at that backpack lying on the floor with the gun that seemed like something out of an old nightmare, I realize that the loose threads of my life have gotten tangled up around my daughter's feet, and now she trips over them because of me. And yet, part of me doesn't want her to know everything, because some truths are like poison. They heal, but before they burn. If you are feeling this weight with me, if you have already carried secrets that no one would understand, leave your comment. It tells you where you are watching from. Here on the Emotion of Age channel, we don't hide the pain, we transform it into courage. Like this video, share with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to start over, because the next turning point may be closer than it seems. And sometimes, what destroys us can also save us. From the day the backpack fell to the ground, everything changed. I could no longer more sleep. With every noise coming from outside, my heart raced as if someone was about to break into our house. Mariana started avoiding me even more. The conversations, which were already few, turned into monosyllables. She would leave without saying where she was going. returning with the smell of cigarettes and gasoline, her eyes red with anger or exhaustion, sometimes both. And I pretended not to see because the truth paralyzed me, because part of me believed that if I pretended a little longer, it would all disappear like it always had before. But it didn't disappear. The morning after the backpack episode, I found the notebook hidden under her mattress, the same one I had seen the night before. I flipped through page after page with shaking hands. Names, dates, locations. A cold repetition of night routes, intersections, exact times. It wasn't just any notebook. It was a spreadsheet in disguise. Movement schedule. Logistics that are too detailed to be something for beginners. Mariana was involved, but what killed me was the silence. She didn't ask me for help. He didn't confess anything to me. Maybe because, like me in the past, I had learned not to trust anyone. I tried to confront her. I waited for her to return one night and left the notebook on the kitchen table, open to the most recent page. She came in, looked at me with contempt, and asked what I was doing. I just said I needed to understand. She laughed, an empty, almost mocking laugh. He accused me of trespassing. He said it was college work, that I was delusional. When I replied that I knew exactly what that was, she screamed, a scream that seemed to carry decades of hurt, anger, and fear. And before locking himself in his room, he uttered a sentence that cut me more than any knife. He said I was the last person in the world with the morals to judge anything, and maybe she was right. Over the next few days, I received 2 anonymous calls, male voices, deep, fast. One of them asked me if I still remembered El Gallo, a name I hadn't heard since the 90s. The other just said that the past takes a toll and that my daughter seemed willing to pay. I hung up without answering. His hands were sweating. The legs didn't obey. It was as if every inch of my house had started to smell like gunpowder again. I sat on the kitchen floor and cried for the first time in years. I cried because I didn't know how to protect myself, because it was the wrong example. And knowing that the line between protecting and repeating was getting thinner and thinner. I started watching Mariana. I wrote down the times she left. He looked at the clothes he wore. One day, I found an old, used phone card in the trash. The number dialed was for a prepaid line. I made some contacts. One of the few who still owed me favors got back to me saying that the line was associated with a warehouse on the industrial side of the city, the same area where I used to deliver goods myself almost 30 years ago. It was as if life was forcing me to relive it all over again, only now on the other side. And the worst part, I didn't know if I was ready for this. The tension between us became a bomb ready to explode. Mariana no longer looked me in the eye. I barely ate at home. I spent hours locked in the bathroom, typing on my cell phone. One night, after she left, I decided to follow. I took a taxi and asked him to keep his distance. I watched as she entered a narrow, dark street and disappeared behind an iron gate with rusty plates. I waited 20 minutes, then 30, until curiosity overcame fear. I got out of the car and walked to the gate. The padlock was just in place. I pushed slowly. The sound of rust echoed like thunder. Inside, what I saw gave me goosebumps from head to toe. There were stacked boxes, fuel cans, bales with illegal stamps, and a woman, around Mariana's age, with a tattoo that I recognized. It was the symbol of an old cell, dissolved decades ago. And in the background, sitting on a plastic chair, a man with a look that I wouldn't forget in a nightmare. Savior, one of my old contacts, presumed dead in 2002. He saw me. I didn't say anything. He just nodded. And I ran away from there as if I were running away from death for the second time. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even eat. I didn't even say it. I just stared at the wall. Until Mariana's bedroom door knocked in the morning and she came out with a new backpack. When she passed me, I stopped in front of her. He said he knew everything, who had seen everything, and that if she didn't stop, she would be dead before she was 28. She looked at me with a hatred that hurt, and I said without hesitation, that if I really knew what was happening, I would keep quiet. And then he left, without looking back. I stood still for a few seconds. Then I went to the living room drawer, where I hid my old phone with an international chip. I called a number I had sworn I would never dial again. He was a former agent, now retired, who owed me his life. I told him I needed to find someone, that I needed to know if my daughter was still coming back. He listened in silence, and in the end, he only responded that the price of redemption is always greater when it starts too late. If you are feeling this story inside your chest, if you have seen the past returning like an echo, Leave your comment here. It tells you where you are watching from. Like the video, subscribe to the Emotion of Age channel, and share it with someone who needs to understand that hiding is not protecting. Sometimes the only way to save the ones we love is to bring the truth to light, even if she destroys everything in her path. Because what comes after the destruction can finally be a real beginning. Mariana's absence for 2 whole days took away what little peace I had left. The silence in that empty house was the same as when I lost my first child. A silence that hurts, that tears you up inside. Every minute was torture, imagining the worst. He walked around the house like a banshee, looking out the window, trying to call, but with no answer. Her cell phone would ring, then hang up. The clothes were still in the room, but it was as if she had evaporated, as if she had been pulled into that world I had spent decades trying to escape. On the second day, the intercom rang and almost made me faint. I ran to the gate, my legs feeling weak. It wasn't her. It was a neighbor, Donna Elvira, a lady who used to talk to me in front of the house sometimes. She said she saw Mariana get into a black car with tinted windows the night before, near the market. He said the girl was nervous, looking around as if expecting something to go wrong. My heart sank in my chest. I knew that pattern. I was once that young woman who gets into a car, pretending to know what she's doing, but shaking inside. Not knowing what to do, I went to an old acquaintance, one of those who swear they've left the world, but still know all the shortcuts to the underworld. Pedro Morales. He now works as a janitor in a building downtown, but he was my direct contact for almost 10 years. When he saw me, he tried to act surprised, but his eyes said it all. He knew something. We sat on a park bench in silence for a few minutes. I was direct. I said that my daughter was involved with something big, that she had disappeared, and that the names I read in her papers took me back to the same hell that we helped build. Pedro tried to deflect, saying that a lot had changed, that the names had changed, that the rules were now different. But when I said Salvador's name, his eyes widened. He said that name should no longer be pronounced, that he was dead, and that, if he had returned, it was not by chance. He said that if Salvador was active again, then something much bigger was being set up behind the scenes, something that involved young people, weapons, borders, and purchased silence. It was an international scheme, and my daughter, apparently, was inside it. I returned home with wobbly legs. The phone rang as soon as I closed the door. It was her, Mariana. The voice is dry, cold, direct. He said he was fine, that I shouldn't call anyone, that I needed space. Before I could ask where she was, she hung up. I didn't say where I was, or with whom. He didn't apologize. It just hung up. I sat on the living room floor, leaning against the wall, and started crying without making any noise. My body was shaking. My stomach seemed to shrink by the minute. That night, the memories came back more strongly. I revived every face I helped disappear, every phone I answered, every code I went through. All that now seemed to have returned to take its toll. But what destroyed me was realizing that Mariana wasn't just a victim of my past. She had made choices, and perhaps like me, he had already crossed lines that he could no longer undo. The difference was that I knew what came next, and she still thought she could control it. On the third day, I received an envelope with no return address in my mailbox. Inside was a photo. Mariana, next to a man I hadn't seen in over 20 years. Deep-set eyes, blank expression, a cigarette in his hand. It was Javier, known as El Cobra, Salvador's right-hand man in the 90s. He was the one who did the dirty work when someone needed to disappear. Seeing my daughter next to him was like being shot. At the same time, I called Pedro. He answered with a tense voice. He said it couldn't continue, that I needed to talk to someone taller, a former investigator who now lived abroad, someone who, like us, also had unpaid bills from this past. The next day, I went to the church in the neighborhood where I grew up, the same one where my mother left me for the last time before disappearing from the world. I went there not out of faith, but out of desperation. I met Father Antonio, who knew my story since I was a little girl. I told everything. For the first time in years, I opened up every detail. I told you about the names, the roles, the gun, the photo. He listened to me in silence, and when I finished, he just said that there are wounds that don't heal with time, but with action. He said that forgiveness does not begin with prayer, but with courage, and that maybe I still had time to do what was right. I returned home determined. It was time to face Mariana head on. That night, she returned. I entered the room, and she was already sitting there waiting for me. The tension in the air was piercing. I approached slowly. She looked at me with contempt, and before I said anything, she spoke. He said he knew everything about me. Who knew what I had done? That the names were all in the files, in the forums, in the folders that someone had shown her. He said he was ashamed of me, who lived for years thinking she was the daughter of a strong woman, and discovered she was just the daughter of a criminal. I was silent for a few seconds, and then I responded, said it was true, that I made mistakes, that I hurt people, that I made decisions that to this day burn me inside. But everything I did was to protect, that if I had spoken before, maybe her life wouldn't be at risk now. And then, she said, with teary eyes and a trembling voice, he looked at me and spoke. I ended up there because I learned from you, because you taught me that truth only hurts, that the world is not fair, that those who survive are those who lie best. At that moment, something broke inside me, an old mirror, a mask, an armor, and for the first time, I understood. Mariana was not just a victim. She was a reflection of the woman I was, and if I wanted to save what was left, I would have to face not only the ghosts, but myself. If you've made it this far, and believe that it's still possible to change the course of history itself, even after everything, comment now with the city where you're watching. Leave your mark. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that the past can haunt you, but you never have the right to decide the ending. Like, subscribe to the Emotion of Age channel and turn on notifications. Because sometimes, the greatest courage is in admitting that you made a mistake and still choose to do differently, even if it hurts, even if it takes everything, because only then can something new be born in its place. The morning after the confrontation with Mariana, I realized that something inside me had changed. It was not a light change, nor a sweet one. It was the kind of change that comes like a breakup. The truth had been told between us, even though it hurt on both sides. But there was between the lines of that conversation, a last thread of hope. And I understood that, if there was a chance to break this damn cycle, it was through me. I could no longer hide behind regrets, or the memories of what I tried to do right. I needed to act, this time with the clarity I didn't have in my youth. Because now, I was no longer just a woman, mother, or ex-criminal. I was the last barrier between my daughter and complete destruction. I called the contact that Pedro had recommended to me. He was a former federal investigator, now living abroad with his identity protected. A man who, it was said, had faced the same scheme years ago and almost died as a result. When he answered, his voice was dry and firm. I said my full name, the real one, the one no one used anymore. There was silence on the other side. He knew who I was, that was clear. When I mentioned Salvador, El Cobra, and Mariana's name, he let out a long sigh. He said they were setting up a new cell, young people with no history, preferably women, with good looks and a clean past. They used these girls to carry documents, small weapons, money and cryptocurrencies, and secrets from older bosses. I said my daughter was being groomed, yes, but she was already too deep to get out without leaving a trace. I took a deep breath. He said he had proof, the notes, the photos, the weapon. He said he knew the paths, that I could offer information in exchange for protection for my daughter. He hesitated. He said he needed to think, that this kind of thing was not simple. But yes, maybe there was a way to help. He asked me to send everything. I scanned the papers, photographed the weapon, the names, the addresses. In 40 minutes, he had everything. The answer didn't take long to come. There would be a confidential hearing. An international prosecutor interested in dismantling part of the group would commit to listening to us as long as I was willing to give my name, my story, and officially present myself as a witness. The price was high. I would stop being invisible. She would go back to being Carmen Velasquez, the one in the headlines, the one in the old reports. My past would come to light once and for all, and Mariana would have to cooperate too. Neither would emerge intact, but there could be a way out, a new chance. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, reliving the worst moments of my life. The deliveries, the screams, the look of my children asking me for food, Diego's disappearance, the loneliness of early mornings. And I thought about Mariana, sitting in some dark warehouse, surrounded by men who see girls as disposable tools. I thought about how I got here, and how, even though I tried to avoid it, maybe I was throwing my daughter into the same darkness. The next day, I waited for her to wake up. I made coffee, something I hadn't done in weeks. When she left the room, her face still crumpled, I asked her to sit down. She looked at me suspiciously, but he sat down. I said everything. no filter. He said he knew who she was dealing with, that he had proof, which we had sent to someone who could help us. She was silent for a few minutes. Then his eyes started to water. I said it wasn't what I thought, that she just wanted to make money to get out of there, that I was tired of our life, who wanted independence, a car, paid college, a life without favors. I understood every word, every sentence, because it was exactly what I wanted when I started. I looked into her eyes and told her I loved her. And if she really wanted to get out of this, she would need to make one last act of courage, tell everything, hurt along with me, and then face whatever comes. 2 days later, we went to the scheduled hearing, a simple, protected room. The prosecutor listened to us carefully. Mariana spoke with a choked voice. He gave the names, the functions, the schedules, everything I knew. I complimented it with antique details, maps of warehouses that were still active, telephones, routes used on the border. At the end of the conversation, the prosecutor looked at us seriously. She said she couldn't guarantee a clean ending, but that, if what we had was confirmed, she would fight for Mariana to receive protection and for me to have my story recorded legally. He said that maybe, with luck, none of us would need to hide our faces anymore. That same night, we returned home in silence. There was no euphoria, there was no relief, but there was something new, a truce, a start of repair. Mariana looked at me at the gate before entering and said she didn't know if she would ever forgive me. But for that choice, I was grateful, and that was enough. The next day, I received a message from someone I didn't expect. It was my granddaughter, daughter of my second son, who I hadn't spoken to in over 15 years. She had seen an excerpt of our story in a local news report. He said he recognized my name, that her mother spoke little about me, but that, if I wanted, she would like to meet me. She sent me a video of her reading a poem, and that, it was like breathing after years underwater. If you are listening to this and felt something similar, if you also believe that the truth can hurt, but sometimes it is the only bridge between the past and salvation, comment below. Write where you are watching from. Show that there are still people who believe that dignity cannot be bought, but rather built. Like the video. Share with someone who needs to remember that there is always one last possible act of courage. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do so now on the Emotion of Age channel. Because sometimes it's in the moment when everything seems lost that the first step towards true freedom is finally taken. The weeks leading up to the final confrontation were like walking through a minefield. Every step needed attention. Each breath was accompanied by the feeling that everything could explode at any moment. Mariana and I spoke little, but now there was a truth suspended between us. It wasn't affection yet. It was not reconciliation. It was a silent survival agreement. She spent more time at home. I slept poorly. I heard her crying in the bathroom, and he pretended not to hear, because sometimes pain needs to flow without witnesses before it becomes something bearable. The prosecutor got in touch again. He said the material we sent was more serious than it seemed. Some names crossed international investigations. Documents and movements were being tracked. An arrest warrant was being prepared for Salvador, El Cobra, and other former members. But the problem is, they also knew there were leaks within the institutions. The prosecutor asked us to be careful. We changed address. We were taken to a safe location, a small apartment with internal cameras guarded by civilian officials. Mariana didn't complain. I think part of her finally understood the scale of what we were facing. The day before the official hearing, I received a call. It was a voice I hadn't heard since the year I disappeared. Savior, cold, slow. He said my full name, Carmen Velasquez. He said he was disappointed that I, of all people, was the last one he expected to see on the other side. That I should know how things worked. And that, if it went to the end, Mariana would pay with her life, her blood for my betrayal. He hung up before I could respond. I had the phone in my hand for minutes. Stop, shut up, swallowing fear like someone swallowing poison on purpose. I called Mariana. I told him about the call. She didn't say anything. He just looked at me and asked if I still wanted to continue. I said yes, that it was no longer a choice, that all we had left now was the chance to not pretend anymore. For the first time, she hugged me without rushing. The hug was hard, uncomfortable, but real. The kind of hug that is not given to those who love easily, but to those who hate themselves for loving so much. The hearing was scheduled for late afternoon. The building was discreet, hidden between busy avenues. There was no indication that there, in that space with the smell of paper and air conditioning, Truths buried for decades would be revealed. Mariana entered first. She was wearing dark pants, a neutral blouse, no makeup, sunken eyes, but firm. I came in later. I sat next to her. The prosecutor asked us to start, Mariana said. With a shaky but clear voice, she told how she was recruited, who introduced her to the group, the type of material he carried, the promise that he would have enough money to change his life in a few months. He said that, at the beginning, he didn't know exactly what he was doing, which I only understood little by little. And when she understood, she was already arrested. The prosecutor asked if she was aware of the risk she was taking. She said yes, but after seeing her mother admit everything she did, she couldn't keep pretending. It was my turn. I took a deep breath. I said every name I remembered. I described meetings. I described deaths. I detailed operations. I admitted my role. I told you what I won, said what I lost. I spoke about Diego's disappearance, from the pain that never went away, from the blood that I never cleaned off my hands, even after so many baths. The silence in the room was thick as concrete. The prosecutor listened. The agents behind her took notes. The recorder on the table blinked slowly, recording every word. At the end of the hearing, the prosecutor stood up. He said there was still a lot to be processed, but, based on what she had heard, she would immediately forward the request for preventive detention of the aforementioned leaders. He also said that, as a protection measure, Mariana would have priority in the witness protection program as long as she agreed to cooperate until the end, and that I, as a key player in old investigations, would be evaluated by the Justice Council for a possible plea bargain agreement. Nothing was guaranteed, but something was starting. We left the room without speaking. In the hallway, a man was waiting for us. It was the same investigator who answered my call a few weeks ago. He handed me an envelope. I said that was for me. When I opened it, there was a copy of a case from 1993, an investigation closed due to lack of evidence. And there, on the footer, was Salvador's signature under another name as a member of a shell company. He looked me in the eyes and said, "It's all connecting, and you just gave us the missing piece." We returned to the apartment in silence. That night, Mariana served me coffee. We sat together on the sofa. She asked me how I managed to survive so long with so much guilt. I said it wasn't survival, it was punishment. Every day I lived pretending that everything was fine was part of the sentence that life imposed on me. And maybe now, after everything, I could start paying in another way. Truly. Hours later, Salvador was arrested. Not because of Mariana, not for me, but because of the set, because of the sum of voices that began to speak, and we were part of it. The next day, the photos were in the local newspapers. Mariana didn't show up. I appeared backwards, but I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I didn't hide. If you made it this far and felt this story was yours, write a word here in the comments, the word truth, because that's what we seek, even when it costs everything. Like the video, subscribe to the Emotion of Age channel, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that justice exists, not perfect, but possible. Because sometimes, exposing the pain is the only way to close the wound. And sometimes, the longest silence of our lives needs to be broken out, loud. Even if only one person hears it, even if only one soul awakens, it's already worth it. 6 months have passed since the hearing. Life, as always, moved on, but nothing was the same again. And for once, that was a blessing. There was no party, there was no announcement of victory, but there was a different silence in that apartment. A light, almost breathable silence. It was as if air had become possible again, as if the ghosts that occupied every corner of my story had finally left through the front door. Mariana now lives in another city, live under protection, with a new name, new routine, and clear limits. We talk every week. The conversations are short, objective, but painless. There is respect, and most importantly, there is a desire to rebuild. She went back to studying, sent a photo the other day, sitting on a library, an open book, a pen in hand, no filters, no poses, just a snapshot of what could have been from the beginning. I cried alone when I saw it. It wasn't sadness, it was relief, a good kind of pain, as if something inside me had finally begun to heal. As for me, I now live in a small housing complex with other elderly women, a social project in partnership with a foundation that helps witnesses and victims start over. I share the hallway with ladies who have pasts as heavy as mine. One of them was a nurse during a military regime. Another lost 2 children to trafficking. We talked a lot. We laughed more than I thought possible. And Sometimes we cry together without having to explain anything. There is a silent sisterhood between women who have survived what should not be survived. My mornings are peaceful. I wake up early. I walk in the courtyard, water my plants. I have 3 vases, one with mint, one with basil, and one with rosemary. I was told that rosemary is good for memory, but sometimes I prefer to forget, not out of cowardice, but because I've faced enough. I choose to remember only what keeps me going. The rest, I leave buried in the ground like the roots of the plants. They are there, but no one needs to see them. Twice a week, I give talks to at-risk young people. I tell my story without flowering, without trying to sound like a martyr. I talk about mistakes, fears, choices that seem small but shape an entire life. Some laugh, others look away. But there is always one who listens with his entire body. And when he finishes, he looks for me in silence, with scared eyes, and says thank you. And that alone is worth it. That alone makes sense to me. Because if I can stop a Mariana from repeating my path, then everything I faced was for something. I'm still scared sometimes. Salvador is in prison, but the system he fed still breathes in other faces, in other cities. But now, I don't run away. I don't hide. I learn to stand up, even with my eyes closed. I learned that dignity can't be bought, it can't be inherited, and it can't be asked for. Dignity is built with each difficult choice, with each unsaid at the right time, with each truth assumed, even when no one is looking. My granddaughter calls me once a month. He sent a video recently, singing a song he learned at school. He has a sweet and firm voice, like Mariana's when she was little, like mine, first of all. I dream of meeting you in person, but I'm in no rush. There are things that need time to not get lost again. We write letters. She calls me Dona Carmen, and I sign as your grandmother, who you love from afar, because love can also exist without constant presence, and sometimes that's all we can give. My relationship with Mariana is not perfect. It never will be. There are deep scars. There are memories that hurt, just to mention. But now, we have a silent agreement of respect. She told me, in one of those phone calls, that maybe one day she will be able to forgive me. I said I don't expect that. I just wish she could forgive herself. Because sometimes, the hardest thing is to accept that we were victims and accomplices at the same time. And that breaking this cycle is the greatest act of love we can have with the next generation. The other day, a young woman asked me what the hardest moment of all was. I replied that it was that exact moment when I realized that my daughter was who I had been, and that if I didn't do anything, she would end up like me. The girl was silent. Then he held my hand, and there I understood that even with everything I lost, something inside me was still capable of generating hope. At 63, I don't have many possessions. I live with the essentials, but I sleep peacefully, and this is something that no money in the world has given me before. The time is different now. The clock no longer beeps like a bomb. It just passes, and I let it go. Because I learned that what comes after shame, after pain, and after exposure is something rare, something pure. It's a real chance to be someone else. If this story spoke to you, if at some point you saw yourself on this path, leave your comment with the word fresh start, because that's what this is all about. Not about forgetting what we were, but about deciding with courage what we can still be. Like this video, subscribe to the Emotion of Age channel and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late. It's never too late to face the past, admit your mistakes, and choose to move forward with dignity. The end of our story does not have to be a continuation of suffering. It could be the beginning of a new chapter, written truthfully, with conscience, and finally, with peace. What almost no one talks about is that starting over also hurts. It's not only liberating, it's not always pretty. Starting over is waking up in a new place and missing the old one, even if the old one was hell. It's having to look in the mirror and face not just the wrinkles or the features marked by time, but everything that was made with those hands, with that mouth, with that silence. It's losing the right to be called innocent, and even so, trying to live with some peace. And this is the part that no one teaches, the after part. After Salvador was arrested and Mariana entered the protection program, many believed that was the end of the story. But for me, it was just the beginning of a completely new stage, the stage where you need to live without the weight of constant fear, but with the weight of memory. And this second weight is sometimes even more difficult to carry. In the first few months, I had difficulty doing simple things. Go to the market, talk to strangers, even smile. I always had the impression that people could read my story from my face. as if everything I did and everything I failed to avoid was written on my forehead. It was during this period that I started writing in an old notebook every night. It wasn't a diary. It was an attempt to map out thoughts so as not to sink. I wrote short sentences, loose memories, things that I didn't even say in the statements, things that only I needed to remember, things that could not be lost, never to be repeated again. I also started to observe the people around me more. Most of the women in the shelter where I live have different stories than mine, but the same emptiness in their eyes. One lost her son to heroin, another lost her husband to the war, another lost herself in a loveless marriage of 50 years, and there, sitting on the patio chairs, sharing tea, we remained silent for long periods. A silence that does not oppress, but that listens. A silence that understands what words never achieve. The sisterhood between mature women who survived what seemed like the end is something I never thought I would experience, and that's what has sustained me. Once a month, I participate in a conversation with teenagers from a recovery center. They come from neighborhoods where violence is the first language. They speak quickly, make little eye contact, and laugh suspiciously. On the first day, a boy asked me what I was doing there, an old woman like me. I answered truthfully. I said I came to stop them from ending up like me. He laughed, mocked, but came back the following month. And now, he always sits in the same corner, quiet, listening to everything. One of the things that hurts me the most is thinking about everything Mariana had to see with her own eyes before seeing me clearly. She was not just a victim of the system. He was a victim of my silence, my cowardice, my half-truths. Kai was the mother who gave food, but didn't give answers. That gave a roof, but hid the past. She grew up learning to distrust, and when he suspected me, it was already too late. I try not to blame myself every day, but guilt is like an extinguished ember that continues to burn inside. Still, there are glimmers of hope. I received a letter from Mariana a few days ago, handwritten, with firm letters, without flourishes. She said she is living in a small village, working with books in a local library, that he is still afraid, but that fear is now lower than the desire to do it right. He said he forgives me a little more every day, and he hopes one day to be able to walk on the same street as me without having to hide his face. I have read this letter dozens of times, and in all of them, I cried. Not because of what I lost, but for what it is still possible to build. My granddaughter also sent a drawing. It's a house with 3 windows and 2 people sitting in the yard. She wrote at the bottom, in large, colorful letters, "To my grandmother Carmen, who is strong as the mountains." I looked at that paper for long minutes, and I thought maybe I was never strong. But surviving requires a strength that the world doesn't usually value. And if in her eyes I am strong, then some part of me did what needed to be done. Today, I see the world with different eyes, less deluded, more attentive. I understood that true justice is not just what happens in the courts, but what we apply within ourselves. There's no point pointing fingers at others if we're not capable of looking at the monsters themselves. And I looked, one by one. I gave a name, I gave a face, I gave a story, and I'm trying to bury them in a dignified way, without pretending they never existed. Because erasing the past is not possible, but learning from it is the only way for the future to have some value. If you've stayed with me this far, if you felt every part of this journey as if it were yours, then I ask you to leave the word dignity in the comments. Because she is the one who brought me here. It was she who, even buried beneath so many mistakes, still found a way to flourish. Like this video, subscribe to the Emotion of Age channel and share it with someone who is trying to understand that you don't have to be perfect to be respected. You just need to have the courage to not run away from yourself anymore. It's never too late to admit what you've done. It's never too late to face what's gone. And it's never too late to, with all the flaws, with all the pain, write a new chapter. Let it be simple. May he be true. And above all, he is free. Because freedom doesn't begin when the gates open. It starts when we stop lying to our own hearts. On quieter days, when the afternoon slowly falls over the courtyard and the light hits the windows of the housing complex, I usually sit with a notebook on my lap and look at my hands. These hands that have already counted dirty money, that have already held weapons, that have already pushed children away believing they were protecting them. These hands now plant mint and help ladies fold sheets, but they remember. They never forgot. Today, when I look around and see the place I occupy, I understand that it is not just about reconstruction. It's about responsibility. Because the past, even if forgiven, does not disappear. It demands vigilance. It turns into surveillance, attention. Be careful, not with the fear of being punished again, but with the awareness that our actions have greater consequences than we imagine. And now, I live for the reflections that I can still help shape. The other day, I was invited to speak at a community event, a meeting between generations, young people at risk, single mothers, ex-offenders, local leaders. They put me in front of a full room. Most didn't know who I was. Others recognized the name with suspicion. I climbed onto the small improvised stage with my heart racing. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in front of so many people, I told my story without any disguise. I said I was an accomplice, author, silent and survivor. I said I failed as a mother, as a woman, as a citizen. But I discovered, late, that admitting it is the first step to liberation. I said that I wasn't telling them all that, so they would applaud me, but so that they would understand that if I was able to turn this page in my 60s, any of them could do the same. The room was silent, and at the end, a young woman approached with her eyes full of water. He said her mother was in prison, and she always thought that their fate was sealed. But when he heard my story for the first time, he believed he could break this chain, that it could start somewhere else. That tore me apart inside, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude, because here was confirmation that the pain I faced, the price I paid, was serving something, not as a justification, but as a seed of another path from another end. With Mariana, things continue to evolve slowly. We speak via messages, sometimes by short calls. She still carries within her parts of the pain we caused each other, and I understand. I don't pressure. I always say that I'm here, that I'm not leaving, that I love her despite everything, and that, above all, I respect it. Because respect was something that was lacking between us for many years, and now it is the basis of everything that can still grow. The other day, she told me that she is attending a support group, that you are learning to trust, naming feelings, to forgive yourself little by little. She told me that once, during a dynamic, she was asked about the most difficult moment in her life, and she replied that that was when she realized that she would become like me if she didn't make a decision. I read this sentence with tears in my eyes, because it was cruel, but it was true. And even though it hurt, it represented the turning point of her life, and that gave me peace. In the corridors of my building, I am no longer seen strangely. Now I am called to mediate conflicts, to listen to people's feelings, to accompany neighbors on medical examinations. Little by little, I gained back the right to be useful, but now in a clean, whole way, with no hiding place, and there is no greater reward than that. Not long ago, I was invited to give an official statement for a book being written about women who faced justice and found another destiny. At first I hesitated, then I accepted, because the story is not just mine. There are many, and if it is told truthfully, it can be a beacon for those who are still in the dark. Today, the world remains complicated, violent, unequal, but I chose where to place my gaze, and I choose to place it where there is still a chance, where there is still doubt, because doubt is the beginning of transformation. It is in doubt that there lies the possibility of doing things differently, and if I can ignite that spark in someone else, even with the marks I carry, then my existence has not been in vain. If you are still here, walking with me along this road made of losses, memories, and reconstruction, now comment on the word rebirth, because that's what this chapter represents. Not a return to what I was, but the birth of a woman who, despite being imperfect, chose not to lie anymore. He chose not to pretend anymore, and above all, he chose not to give up. Like this video, if it touched your heart, share with I'm someone who needs to hear that there is still time, which still works. Subscribe to the Emotion of Age channel and turn on notifications. Here, we don't tell stories about perfect people. We tell stories of real people who stumbled, fell, but decided to get up with scraped knees and a whole heart. Because dignity is not what remains when everything goes well. Dignity is what we build when everything seemed lost. And yet, we decided to continue, one step at a time, one truth at a time, until the light, which seemed impossible, finds us again. There are days when I wake up before the sun rises and sit on the edge of the bed, looking at the floor as if there was still something there that I forgot to pick up. It's not sadness that wakes me up early. It's surveillance. It is the body that still carries the habit of being alert. Decades of living behind locked doors and light naps leave marks that not even freedom can erase. But unlike in the past, today I get up without rushing. I step onto the cold floor with the calm of someone who knows that, for the first time, they don't need to run from anything. The routine became a kind of foundation. I make coffee, water the plants, read something, write when my memory gets tight. At first, living without hiding was a strange learning experience. It was like going out without a coat in winter. But I discovered that when we live without the weight of lies, the cold also passes differently, lighter, more bearable. I started participating in a community radio project that broadcast short stories from local residents. They invited me to read excerpts from letters and reports from women who went through extreme situations. At first, I read it with a choked voice. Afterwards, I gained firmness. Today, I can finish texts with my chest lifted. It's like lending my voice to other pains. And in doing so, my pain also settles, as if accepting that it is no longer alone. One of the most symbolic moments of this new stage was when I received an envelope from the justice system, an official document, sealed, with my full name printed in cold handwriting. Inside, there was confirmation of the closure of all old processes that were under analysis. The paper said that due to my collaboration and the risk I took, the state recognized my contribution as legitimate and fundamental to the dismantling of part of an active criminal network. This wasn't a prize. It wasn't forgiveness. It was recognition. And as simple as it sounds, it gave me something I didn't expect to feel again: legitimacy. Reading my name on a document that wasn't an arrest warrant or a subpoena was like hearing a forgotten song playing at a low volume. I didn't change my name. I no longer needed to hide. I'm still Carmen Velasquez, but now I am also a woman who helped break a cycle. And that, even among all the pain, became part of my pride. Mariana is still going through her process. He is undergoing therapy, following the rules of the protection program, and little by little, resuming his own narrative. She sent me a recent recording, reading an excerpt from a book she is studying. Her voice is firmer. There is a type of peace that is built in the speech of those who are truly trying to build a new path. And hearing that was like planting a tree in land that previously only yielded ashes. In one of the last calls, Mariana asked me if I felt free. I was silent for a moment. Then I replied that I don't know what complete freedom is, but that today, when I look in the mirror, I can hold my own gaze. And that, for me, is the beginning of freedom. Because for years, the mirror was my enemy. It was where I saw everything I tried to hide. Today, he shows me a whole woman. Marked, yes, but whole. I started writing letters again. Letters I don't send. Some for Diego, my missing son. Others for my mother, who left me at that orphanage. And many for myself, for the woman I was, for the young woman who thought deceiving was the only way to survive. I write to organize what remains, to remember that no pain is completely overcome, but it can be transformed. The other day, while I was sorting my papers, I found a photo of the gun that fell out of Mariana's backpack, the one that started it all, the one that made me see how alive the past was. I held the image in my hands for a few seconds. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel scared. I felt responsibility. And for the first time, I didn't hide it. I put it in a folder with other documents, a kind of silent memorial, so that, when I'm no longer here, someone will understand that that gun didn't kill anyone. She revealed. She interrupted a destiny. And this is also part of justice. Soon, a team of journalists will come to interview me. They want to tell my story for a special about late reconciliation. They said it's inspiring. I don't know if it is. I don't feel inspiring. I feel like a survivor. But except I, because if a 63-year-old woman, with everything against her, managed to find a path that doesn't end in shame, then that story deserves to be told. Not out of vanity, but out of necessity. Because other women, right now, are experiencing what I experienced. And perhaps they are on the edge of the same abyss. And maybe this story can pull one of them back. If you have reached this point, if this journey has touched you, if you have recognized pieces of yourself in my words, I ask you to comment with the word path. Because the path is not a place, it's a choice. And every choice, however small, can change everything. Like this video, subscribe to the Emotion of Age channel and turn on notifications. Here we don't offer you ready-made happy endings. We offer you truths, scars, and the real possibility of, even injured, continuing walking. because there is a silent dignity in those who decide not to hide anything anymore, who transforms guilt into direction, fear into courage, and bridging pain, a bridge between what we were and what we can still be, even when no one else believes, even when there's only one last chance left. She is enough. She is always enough. Sometimes people ask me if I regret everything. If I could go back in time, what would I do differently? The question is always loaded with expectation, as if there was an easy answer, as if there was a version of my life that could be edited like a film, with cut scenes, reworked lines, alternative endings. But real life doesn't work like that. Life is a straight line, even if full of curves. And I don't know if it would change everything, because if I hadn't lived exactly as I did, perhaps I would never have understood the value of truth, nor the real weight of freedom. Yes, I regret a lot, but the regret that hurts me most is not what I did. That's what I left out. The conversations not made, the hugs refused, the times I looked at Mariana and, out of fear, I looked away. The times she needed a whole mother, but only found a woman in pieces. This haunts me far more than any criminal past, because the most lasting violence is that of silence. It's what isn't said that hurts the most. My story, as harsh as it is also about that. What wasn't talked about in time, and about the almost desperate effort to try to say it before it's too late. And even though I know that not everything can be fixed, I keep trying, because there is immense dignity in effort. And because love, even when it fails, always deserves a second try. Mariana and I don't have a film relationship. We don't talk every day. There are still walls between us, but there are also windows. There are now moments when we can look at each other without guilt, without anger. There are already exchanges that don't hurt, words that don't hurt. Sometimes it's just a message saying everything is okay. Sometimes it's just audio with the sound of the sea in the city where she now lives. And that's enough. Because after all, little becomes immense. Looking back, I see that it took me decades to understand what it means to protect someone. It's not hiding. It's not lying. It's not doing everything for her. Protecting someone really is giving that person the right to know who they are dealing with. It's telling her story without filters, so she can choose what to do with it. It took me too long to learn, but I learned. Today, when I talk to young people, I always repeat the same phrase: never hide the truth from those you love, even if she hurts you. Because love that cannot handle the truth is not love. It's dependence. It's control. And control does not build a future, build prison. And I've lived in too many prisons to wish that on anyone else. With my granddaughter, everything is different. We are building a relationship based on what is possible. I don't make up stories. I don't try to look like someone I'm not. I speak to her with the care of someone who knows they are planting a seed, and that the land, if it is well treated, can bear fruit even after everything it has been through. She calls me grandma, and sometimes he asks me difficult things. I respond. I always respond, because she deserves to know, and because I deserve to be who I really am, without masks. Recently, she asked me if I was bad. That took me by surprise, but I didn't run away. I took a deep breath and said that I did bad things. Yes, but that doesn't define me forever. He said that people make mistakes, but they can also choose to do the right thing later. And that is the choice that accompanies me now. She was silent. Then he sent me a hand-drawn heart, and that was worth more than any sentence, any acquittal. I am approaching a time when the body begins to fail. My legs feel tired. My vision is less clear. My fingers are slower. But my mind is clearer than ever. And my heart, too. Because now, every gesture I make is whole. I no longer need to pretend, nor run, nor hide. I live with the lightness of someone who has accepted that not everything will be resolved gone, but there is beauty in the effort, and that there is truth in starting over. I've been dreaming about Diego, always the same way. He appears on the porch of the old house with a slight smile, looking at me as if he knows. I always wake up with wet eyes, but not from pain, of longing and peace, because I believe that wherever he is, he knows that I tried, that I'm trying, and that even without answers, I never stopped looking for meaning. If you are still here, listening to me, reading, following this story until the end, then comment the word truth now, because it was the truth that set me free, not the justice of the courts, not the forgiveness of others. It was my decision to stop running away from myself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs strength to face their own story. And subscribe to the Emotion of Age channel, because there is no room for perfection here, only for those who have the courage to continue, even with the scars. Because in the end, the greatest proof of love for ourselves is the choice to live without masks, with the pain, with the mistakes, with the memories, but also with the dignity of someone who doesn't give up. Those who look back recognize everything they did, and yet he continues walking, because it still works, because there is still time, because we still are. And now that this story comes to an end, I take a deep breath before moving on, because telling all this out, loud, without hiding parts, without making up feelings, was more than a story. It was a liberation. It was like opening a window after years of breathing dust, like letting the sun into a room where there were only shadows. And as difficult as it was, I wouldn't change a single word. Because if there's anything this story taught me, it's that the truth, even when it comes late, can still transform. I look back and see Carmen from so many stages. The girl abandoned in an orphanage, hungry for a hug. The impulsive young woman who believed that crime was a shortcut and that hiding what she felt was a sign of strength. The mother who, even full of love, made a mistake trying to protect. The woman who survived in silence, paying with her own body, with her own soul, for every decision she made. And finally, I see the Carmen of now, an older woman, scarred but lucid. A woman who understood that it's not about erasing what she lived, but about giving meaning to what's left. My journey is not unique. There are thousands of women like me spread across the world. Women who survived abandonment, poverty, violence. Women who carry pasts that could never be told. Women who love in silence, who cry in the bathroom, who blame themselves for things they did and others they couldn't avoid. This story is for them too. For every woman who has ever been afraid of being discovered. For every mother who failed trying to get it right. For every grandmother who today lives with nostalgia for what she couldn't build. Life is not made of successes. It's made of attempts. And some attempts hurt more than others, but even failed attempts have value, because they are the ones who show us where there is still a way. They are the ones who one day lead us to the decision to change. And change is always possible, even at 60, even at 70, even when it seems late, because dignity has no age. She has courage, and courage is a choice that is made every day. Mariana follows her path, and I follow mine. We are different. We are linked by wounds, by memories, by bonds that never break. We still have a long way to go until complete forgiveness, if it even exists. But today, we can now talk without hate. We can now say goodnight lightly. We can now remember the past without feeling that it controls us. And that, in itself, is a silent miracle. Today, if you asked me what is the biggest learning from everything I have experienced, I would say the following. It's never too late to become someone you respect. Not someone admired by others, not someone who has fame or is applauded, but someone who, when they lie down at night, can close their eyes in peace. Let him know that he did the best he could with what he had, who didn't run away from herself, who didn't use fear as an excuse to keep making mistakes. The world can be cruel, people can judge, and the past often comes back with force. But none of these things are greater than the decision to be whole, to be honest, to stop repeating the mistakes that hurt us, and to look at who we are with compassion. Because if we don't learn to forgive ourselves, we will remain imprisoned until the end. And the prison of guilt is the quietest and loneliest of all. So, if you've come this far, listening to me, feeling me, walking with me along every part of this road, I thank you. Not with ready-made words, but truthfully, because telling this story was only worth it because of those who listened with an open heart. You who stayed, who didn't turn away, who wanted to understand. You are part of this turnaround. You are proof that there is still room for stories like this. Real, tough stories, but also human and full of new beginnings. Comment below on the word courage if this story spoke to you. Share with someone who may need strength to face their own ghosts. Like this video, subscribe to the Emotion of Age channel, and turn on notifications to continue receiving stories like this. Here, we don't pretend that life is easy. We show that, even though it is difficult, it can still be lived with dignity, because it doesn't matter how many mistakes you make. It doesn't matter how much you made mistakes trying to get it right. There will always be a point of return. There will always be someone to listen to you. And even if there is no one, you can be that person. You can be the beginning of change, and that's all that matters. Thank you for accompanying me here. May your story, whatever it may be, also find a space for healing. May you have the strength to continue. And that one day, looking back, I can say with pride, I wasn't perfect, but I was true. And that, in the end, is what matters most.